Hey everybody, I'm Sue O'Connell. Welcome back to Lunch Hour Live. Great to see you. Thanks for tuning in with us. Look at this month, World Channel is teaming up with PBS to bring back Eyes on the Prize, that award-winning documentary series that explores the civil rights era. Now, the series, it's told from the perspective of ordinary people who do extraordinary things, and those things change the very fabric of our American life. Now, even though Eyes on the Prize first aired 30 years ago, it continues to resonate with Americans today as younger generations try to understand how we have arrived at this pivotal moment in our country. We're going to take a look at some clips from the series, but first I'm joined by two of the folks who worked on Eyes of the Prize. Judith Vecchione is an executive producer of GBH National Programs and documentary filmmaker who is also a SNCC member, Judy Richardson. Judith and Judy, welcome to Lunch Hour Live. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Judy, I just want to ask quickly before we take a look at a clip, why was this series groundbreaking in 1987?
Well, for the first time, you actually got the stories of the people who did it beyond Dr. King. You know, they had always set up Dr. King as the only person who did anything in the movement, and he was amazing. But if you do that, then you deny to people that they can do things too. And so what Eyes did for the first time ever was to show the regular people in these local movements who were not just the foot soldiers, right? They were the leaders. And some of them had been working in those fields before Dr. King or SNCC or CORE ever got to their locations. And it storytells it. You know, it storytells the modern civil rights movement through the eyes of those who actually participated in the events. It was groundbreaking.
Judith, why bring the series back now? There's been, opportunities to do it in the past, and maybe looking forward, maybe there was a time in the future you might think, but why right now? Why the series now?
Oh, this is a fraught moment, isn't it, in our country's history, where we are struggling all over again with questions of systemic racism, with questions of opportunity and opportunity denied, with questions of what the power of the individual is versus the power of the government or whoever else you want to set it up. So it speaks to all those really live topics right now. And we're incredibly grateful to World Channel for working to put this together right now.
All right, well, let's take a look. There's so many issues that have been covered in Eyes on the Prize. Let's take a look at a clip.
The fear that had shackled us all left suddenly when we were together.
If you can't vote, you ain't free. And if you ain't free, well, then you're a slave.
It might seem like ancient history.
He said, "Why don't you stand up?" I said, "I don't think I should have to stand up."
All you niggers, get up from the lunch counter or we're gonna arrest you.
But it was just 60 years ago, and the stories still resonate for us all.
There was not a blackface in sight anywhere.
We might as well ask for complete desegregation, go for broke, so to speak.
Segregation in the North was dynamic, it was real, blatant, ugly, violent.
What you want is the nation to be upset when anybody is killed, and especially when one of us is killed.
Eyes on the Prize, the landmark series, which takes you back to see and hear the stories that created a movement.
Movement meant that finally we were encountering on a mass scale the evil that had been destroying us on a mass scale.
So powerful. We invite you watching to send your comments and questions on Facebook and YouTube, and we'll answer them throughout the show. Judy and Judith, I have to say, rewatching the series, which I would have done anyway, but did in preparation for this segment, I was struck again by how much I didn't know in the first run, right? And also, I really didn't understand the story of how this series came to be, the struggles of actually getting it financed and getting it on. Can you talk to me a little bit about this, the origin story of the series?
Judy, let me pass it to you for sure.
Okay. Well, I find out about it 1979. I become the first full-time paid staff person when it was just going to be like an hour or so. Who knew it would come to 14, and Henry knew that I was coming up. I was joining my then boyfriend, Dave Lacey, a Black person who was actually going to be exec producer at GBH. And so we come up, and Henry knew that I had been at SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which is the group that grows out of the sit-ins. So he assumes, since nobody really knows Black side at that point, well, maybe I can get folks to talk to us. Now, I knew nothing about filmmaking. Can I just put a real big underline under that? Zilch, zed, nada. But Henry assumes, well, I can bring in some of the things that I might know. But at that point, it's just going to be an hour. He has no funding. He thinks he's going to get something from what was called Capital Cities Communications, which was a kind of network of small TV stations and whatever. And so they were going to give him a grant to do something on regular people. But they really wanted to do something on, they called discovery. They really wanted to know how Dr. King was really assassinated. Okay. Well, that's not what we ended up doing. And so they pulled the funding. It lays fallow from about 1970, we leave in 80, from about 80 until he picks it back up because of Ruth Batson, Boston native, NAACP executive, close friend of Henry's, who says, you can't let this lay. Because we had done some initial interviews. And so people like Marion Wright Edelman of Children's Defense Fund, and a number of, as Henry says, Black women who are in positions of being grant officers at foundations. A lot of folks he then was able to tap, and he finally got the funding. But Judith can pick up how hard it was once Eyes One started.
Yeah, go ahead, Judith.
Yeah, I want to say that you're hearing from Judy, and you'll hear from me, Henry Hampton, who was the executive producer, the driving force, and the visionary. I mean, that's really what Henry was a visionary about how important this story was to tell, and to tell to everyone, and to tell fairly. And I know that when I came on, people said to me, why are you interested in this story? You're not a Black person. And I said, this is my story. This is your story. This is everyone's story in this country. We have to get it right. So once we got enough funding to start, notice not enough funding to finish, but enough funding to start, the next big hurdle was finding the teams. And Henry, bless him, knew that he needed to have a range of perspectives so that we could argue, and boy did we argue within the groups about how the stories were told, who were the right storytellers, what needed to be added and what didn't, what couldn't fit in. I mean, breaks your heart what you can fit into an hour and what you can't.
What were your roles on the show, on the production? What did each of you do?
I was the series senior producer, so I was the second editorial person after Henry, and went with him to put together these teams. Judy?
Yeah, and I was the research consultant, I guess. And then later, after the 14 hours, and then on the second series, I was the series associate producer. And then I became the education director. So I was taking around to schools and teachers and academic institutions and stuff, and talking about how do you use eyes to be relevant to what you're dealing with today.
Judy, how does this?
I just want to say she was bringing the lived experience that was so critical as one of the perspectives to be aware of as we were telling these stories.
Judy,
people like me, I'd marched a little, but okay, Judy.
Judy, is this the difference of Eyes on the Prize as a documentary, as a film? Is the difference in it that it's so driven by the perspectives of the people who were there and experienced it, rather than people from, outside or with a foot in the movement who covered it academically or wrote about it? Is that what makes it so special and so different from other documentaries?
Absolutely. What's amazing is that there are no scholars interpreting this for people, right? And even the narration has a very light hand in telling you how to think about stuff. It is all coming from those who actually lived this experience. And I will say, one of the things I'm so glad Judith mentioned the absolute amazing vision that Henry had for this. And that comes out of the fact that he had been on the Selma to Montgomery March in 1965, the Voting Rights Act. Now, I had been there, but I had gone from there to Lowndes County, Alabama after that. but he was on the march, and that's why he understood the role that regular people did in making this history. So it is, yes, it is that you're seeing it through the eyes of those who lived it. And, Judith, it was really important in terms of making sure that the accuracy was there. I should say, by the way, when I show this with teachers, they will often tell me, my students, I can talk till I'm blue in the face. But my students do not believe that some of this stuff happened because it seems so amazing. Well, it did then. Now they're still trying to stop people from voting. But back then, it was a little less understood. And so teachers will say, my students will not believe it no matter how much I talk about it until they see it in black and white in the real footage, not recreations, because we were not allowed to do recreations. So everything you see actually happened.
It's amazing. And one of the first stories that gets highlighted in the series is a story that I actually learned from the series the first time around. I'm sorry, that's my dog making a lot of noise in the background. And it's the tragic story of Emmett Till. And I was horrified, obviously, learning it, and also horrified that I didn't learn about it until I saw the series 30 years ago. For those who may not know, Emmett Till was a 14-year-old boy who was murdered while visiting his family in Mississippi. He was from the North, and he didn't know the rules of the South, and that cost him his life. Let's take a look at a clip.
Emmett Till had broken one of segregation's rules. He talked fresh to a white woman in a store. He was only 14, he was a Northerner, and he didn't understand.
He went into the store to buy some candy. Before we went in, he had showed the boys around his age, he had some picture of some white kids that he had graduated from. That was, female and male. So he told the boys down there, hey, you got around this store? It must have been around about maybe 10 to 12, youngsters around there, that the girls was his girlfriend, So one of the local boys said, hey, there's a girl in that store there, so I bet you want to go in there and talk to her. So he went in there to, get some candy. So when he was leaving out the store, after buying the candy, he told us, say, bye, baby. And the next thing I knew, one of the boys came up to me and say, man, you got a crazy cousin. He just went in there and said bye to that white woman. And that's when this man I was playing checker with, this older man, I guess he must have been around about 60 or 70, he jumped straight up and said, boy, y'all about to get out of here, that lady come out of that store and blow y'all brains off.
Wednesday, the sheriff came and told me they had found the body at Phillip and wanted me to go and identify the body, which I did. And we found the body with didn't have on any clothes at all. The body was so badly damaged that we couldn't hardly just tell who he was, but he happened to have on a ring with his initials, and that cleared it up.
It obviously never gets easy to watch that segment and hear that story. But Judith, I want to go back to something you said earlier about the fights and conflict that was set up purposefully in the production of the show in order to make a better documentary. And specifically, there was a lot of discussion regarding how to tell the story of Emmett Till. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I produced this show with my associate producer, Llewellyn Smith, who is now a brilliant filmmaker in his own right. And as we put this together, to us, to Henry, the story was the death of Emmett Till. To us, and we were ultimately able to convince Henry of this, the story was the courage of Mose Wright and the people in the town in standing up and identifying the white killers. And it was the story that set us off with the idea that an individual makes a huge amount of difference at great risk, sometimes at risk of their lives, which Mose Wright makes it very clear he's never going back to Mississippi after he finishes identifying them, because he won't live. So that was a hard struggle, and we went back and forth on it. It wasn't that there was any disagreement about how important it was. It was, how do we get the right message out? And it was hard. Those kinds of struggles were over and over again presented to us, because every one of these stories has individual versus group, local versus national, and sometimes you have the limits of the medium. You know, film can do many things absolutely wonderfully, but it can't do everything. And we were making choices all the time to
What a good model. What a good model, though, to talk about conflict in a way that it's a safe space in order to move forward and to bring a better outcome. You know, I mean, I was just struck by the conversations around the making of this, and how that conflict of putting men and women working together, and African-American people of color, Black people with white people, and the hope of bringing that natural tension and harnessing it in a good way.
It's called democracy. This is and that's one of the reasons it's so relevant today, where we're trying to figure out who gets to speak, who gets to vote, what does it mean to be a democratic nation. So it's one of the tremendous relevancies.
Judy, so much. Go ahead.
I would just add, one of the things that Henry did, which was a little untoward in terms of some of the very independent filmmakers who were part of these teams, was that he would bring everybody in for screenings. So Ditch, who was the one who would clean up the office with a gun on his holster, by the way, every Saturday, when we were on the South End, and all the interns. And what was really interesting is, in the same way that we always felt, for example, in SNCC, in the movement that I come out of, it was that every voice was important, every opinion was important. And so he would ask just, whomever it was. It could be Derek Evans, who was an intern then. All of these people, well, what did you think? Did it make sense to you? Do you have any questions? That was really important to Henry, first of all, in terms of improving the film, but also that he wanted to make sure that that everybody felt they had a role in it, that there was, that they had a part in this filmmaking.
So I want to talk about one of the parts that is so much of what Boston is today and was, and that obviously is the busing crisis of the 1970s, which is covered in Eyes on the Prize. It's a fascinating moment for us here in Boston. We have a Black woman mayor who went through the busing crisis, bused from her home in the South End to Charlestown to a school, Mayor Kim Janey. We have one of the candidates, and also Mayor Janey went on to the METCO program. One of the candidates, Andrea Campbell, city councilor who went through the public school system. Several of the candidates are of an age where they went through the school system either just at the busing crisis or just afterwards. So it's an interesting moment here in Boston. And this segregation of the neighborhoods that led to bad quality schools for Black children, leading federal judge W. Arthur Garrity Jr. to issue a landmark ruling on busing. And for those who don't know, violence and protests erupted across the city, particularly in places like South Boston, where, as I mentioned, Black students were bused to predominantly white neighborhoods. In the episode, The Keys to the Kingdom, Eyes on the Prize takes us back to one of the ugliest chapters in Boston history. And I want to just give you a warning. This clip does contain racial slurs. Let's watch it together.
When we started up the hill, you can hear people saying, "Niggas go home." There were signs. They had made up signs saying, "Black people stay out. We don't want any niggers in our school." And there were people on the corners holding bananas like we were apes.
As we went up the hill and approached the school, our students got very, very quiet. Where they had been just like any other kid riding a bus, making noise, laughing, talking, suddenly as they approached this place, they got very, very quiet. And then they would have to stay there till the police came over, escorted them out the bus and in through the metal detectors into the school. it was, I began for the first time to say, Ruth, maybe you shouldn't have gotten involved. Maybe you shouldn't have urged this desegregation. It killed me to see our black students go through that procedure.
What do you think is going to happen when you go to school?
When we go up there, we're going to be stoned. It's not fair to me, because why is the other way around when they come up here? When they come up here, we won't mess with them, so why when we come up there, they mess with us?
What do you think about the people of South Boston, Joanne? If you had a message you'd like to tell them, what would it be?
I don't think it's fair. It's not fair to me.
It's just astonishing again to see these children, right? I mean, children, babies, little babies. And I'm wondering, Judy, I mean, I know how I feel watching this, having lived through it. I wasn't in Boston, I was in Revere, but, you know, it was a daily conversation in our household. What are the feelings that come up watching this again?
Well, you know, it's hard. What's amazing to me, and I got to say this, the 14 hours, it's still amazing to me. You know, I've seen clips, I've shown clips. I mean, we'll do it in July, 3-week teacher training institute. I see this, every time I see these clips, it just, you know, it just touches you. And I look at that clip and I think of Jackie Shearer, a black filmmaker who was from Boston, you know, and then comes on to do that piece. And so understands it in her bones, you know. And so she, you look at that, and it's funny because when teachers will tell me that they've shown that clip, sometimes they show it without saying that it's from Boston. And so they'll ask students, well, you know, where do you think this happened? And usually people, you know, the students will say, oh, Alabama, Mississippi. Well, no, it's Boston. You know, when you look at Ruth Batson, I think of how amazing she was all the way through as a support for Henry. I mean, she was a primary support for Henry as he started building the series, as he thought about this particular segment, certainly, but generally the series. She was the one who said, you got to take all that footage that you shot in 1979 and you got to do something with it, you know. So I see all of that when I look at that clip, and it's just amazing to me.
Judith, as I'm rewatching the series, I'm about halfway through, and I'm struck by that if I close my eyes and just listen to it, it could be about what's happening right now. I mean, there are so many scenes, so many speeches, and some of it is in reverse, right? Some of it about, you know, President Kennedy and sending troops in to protect people, you know, and the power of the presidency. I mean, there's just so many complex issues that are so resonating right now. Do you think there could be a reboot of Eyes on the Prize? I mean, do you think that there's a let's pick up where we left off opportunity?
Absolutely. There are things that have happened since we stopped. The series ends in
85, 86.
86, okay.
86.
No, it didn't, because it was on the air in 88. Right. Is that right?
Well, no, I'm sorry. The series ends around the 8, but the second series airs in 1990.
Right. So yes, there's certainly a huge amount that has happened since then. And in fact, at one point, World Channel did do an Eyes on the Prize then and now. Hold on, I need to shut this off. Go away. How do I make you go away? There you go. They did do a comparison 4 years ago, and that was interesting, and you could certainly do it again now. But they're not understanding that I'm busy.
They're calling to tell you they can see you on Lunch Hour Live. They have a question.
But yes, we could do it. It would be very difficult because we are in the midst of it. The Eyes series, there was a little bit of time, a little bit of space to put a punctuation point at the beginning and the end. Not that you had to, but that was what we did. I still think it should be done.
Judy, is the prize? Is the prize we're reaching for the same? Is the prize in the Eyes on the Prize? Is it the same?
Well, I think Yeah, I mean, I think for everybody, it was getting an equality of power. I mean, it really was about equality of power. I mean, when you see, for example, there's one segment in Eyes 2 where it's the last year of Dr. King's life. And you see him fighting against the Vietnam War, but also for economic justice. And so you hear him in real time, well, not in real time, but in the speech talking about what we need is a radical redistribution of economic power. Now, that's not the Dr. King of 63 with I Have a Dream. It's economic power. I think what you get is certainly the issue of the voting rights issue is really important. Back then it was, how do you get Black people registered to vote without getting them killed? Now it is, how do you register them without having the state like Georgia or Texas or wherever trying to suppress that vote? But all of it is about, how do you equalize access to power? I mean, that's then and that's still now.
Judith, is there one interview? I know this is the heartbreaking question, but is there one interview or one thing that stands out for you when you think about Eyes on the Prize that is just sticks with you all the time?
My colleague Lou Smith did an interview with a woman who had marched for a year in Montgomery as they were trying to break bus segregation. And she told a story that just absolutely sticks with me. Very short, she says, we would be walking and the white folk would say, N-word, don't you know it's better to ride than to walk? And she says, this is a matronly, sweet-faced, middle-aged woman says, no, we'd say back to them, no, cracker, we'd rather walk. And I thought, oh, you see that strength, you see that, it just sticks with me to have that courage and that self-understanding. The other thing that sticks with me is always the community support. I mean, the Ruth Batson in the clip that you just showed in Boston, talking about, should I have gotten involved? What you're seeing is, and you see this throughout the series over and over again, adults fighting for their children, fighting for their comrades, making community work for them. And that's what's going to take us forward, I think. So really relevant to understand the power of the individual and the power of the community.
Where can folks watch Eyes on the Prize?
World Channel. Across the country, we reach something like 75% of all households, and it is airing. We're up to episode 3 at this point, yes. 4, but it's streaming as well. So you can pick it up streaming through Passport and through World Channel.
And Judith, what we hope is that, can I just say, what we hope is that it will go back to free streaming for teachers who really need access to this series through streaming, and free and unlimited. So let me just get that point in.
Yeah.
I appreciate both of you. So good to spend time with you at this Lunch Hour Live. Best health to you. Stay safe. I'm sure I'll speak with you both in the future. Thank you so much. What a great pleasure.
Good to see you, Judith.
Lovely to see you too.
Thanks everybody watching on Facebook and YouTube. We'll be back April 14th with Nova's Picture a Scientist. It's a new documentary exploring the barriers that women face in STEM. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm Sue O'Connell. I'll see you soon.